I'm not sure how many of you were here for the February 2019 campaign launch of the Mandarin. Hands up. All too shy. I definitely saw some of you all. That was a memorable event for many reasons, even before it started. Some of you may remember that the venue which we had originally booked accepted our deposit, cancelled on us at the last minute. And it was only quick thinking by Jocelyn that managed to get us to hold the event as planned at the Mandarin Orchard. The original host apologized profusely to us and refunded our deposit. But this is something that unfortunately we quite commonly experience, and not just the SDP, but all the alternative parties in Singapore. So this year we avoided the problem of somebody cancelling on us at the last minute or charging us some extravagant charge if they didn't actually reject us by having the event here. And it looks like we're just about enough place for everybody. There is some room around the sides if you want to come in. Anyway, we had a great event in February 2019, and we're going to have an even better one today. The good news for those of you who were there is that we only have 2 speeches and 1 panel. In 2019, we had 6 speeches. But if you want to hear more from us, I'm sure you've got plenty of opportunities to do that. So many of you will ask about the timing of this event. Well, our GE 2020 campaign launch was held in February 2019. 17 months and 1 pandemic before the actual election. The SDP are a serious political party, and we take our responsibilities as an alternative voice for Singaporeans very seriously. We know that to mount a credible campaign, we need time to mobilize volunteers, update our policies, prepare our social media strategies, walk the ground, get to know the residents, which is especially important if we aim to win the constituency and manage the town council. Now, getting visibility in a constituency is especially hard in Singapore because we are a close second to the United States as champions of gerrymandering. Yeah. As academic Elvin Ong pointed out recently, under the current electoral system, the gap between the number of votes won and the number of seats held has progressively widened. Since 1968, when the PAP won 87% of the vote, got 100% of the seats, all the way up to 2020, when they only won 61% of the vote and got 89% of the seats. The only political system which comes close to this is the one which invented gerrymandering, the US Congress, where apparently 94.5% of incumbents get re-elected. I mean, that's incredible. We have been told the Election Boundaries Review Committee has not yet been formed. But we don't know when they will be formed or what are their specific terms of reference. In fact, the size of constituencies seems to be rather random and arbitrary. For example, Potong Pasir has got 18,551 voters, whereas Bukit Panjang SMC is almost twice as many, with 35,258. The one thing that we do know is that a new returning officer has been appointed for the next general election. According to the Straits Times, he was previously the Deputy Secretary of the Ministry of Law, at a time when any Singaporean could ask him for a list of high-end government rental properties that were not advertised in any public website. So it sounds like he's a very helpful person, and hopefully the election boundaries process will be more transparent this time around. I sense a bit of skepticism in this room, and that's partly why we need such a long lead time, as there's no way of knowing which constituencies will disappear and which will remain, which will merge or which will be divided. Historically, constituencies where the PAP has won less than 55% of the vote tend to disappear, such as Joo Chiat or Chengshan. However, that's not always the case all the time, so we have to plan for all eventualities. We also began planning for this event a long time ago, so it had nothing to do with the change of PMship, which was suddenly announced last month. We wish Mr. Lawrence Wong all the very best. In fact, I had a nice conversation with him some time ago at a scientific meeting where he was guest of honor. And I discovered he did his undergraduate studies at the University of Wisconsin, where I did my postgraduate work, although our times did not overlap. We reminisced over what is probably the world's best ice cream, made in Bascom Hall, near the dairy school. But however, like most Singaporeans, actually, I think most of us wish we knew more about his politics than his guitar playing skills. But time will tell. Some interesting insights, though, did come recently from an interview that Mr. Wong gave to The Economist, a magazine that is apparently not a favorite of his cabinet colleague, the law minister. In it, Mr. Wong is quoted as saying, "We welcome foreign professionals to work in Singapore, but it is controlled, because if it is not controlled, I think we will be easily swamped. We cannot afford to be like the UAE, where the local residents are only less than 10% of the population. Now, we agree with the first part of the statement in that we welcome people who are committed to contributing to Singapore, but we do not believe that the immigration in Singapore is appropriately controlled right now. Now, let me make this very clear. We are not against foreigners coming into Singapore. In fact, we have a detailed SDP immigration policy which welcomes talented foreigners who have ties to Singapore and are willing to contribute. What we are against is the cynical exploitation of foreign workers, low-wage foreign workers, brought in because the primary talent they have is the ability to do the same job as Singaporeans but for lower wages. The Prime Minister recently spoke of jobs that Singaporeans are willing to do, and he cited construction as an example. Now, I recently returned from a trip to the UK, and we walked past some massive construction projects in the London Docklands. What impressed me was how few workers there were, or how many machines there were. All the workers appeared to be local and well equipped to man the machines, so they would go around just turning on the machines and monitoring them. In Singapore, in contrast, because there is no minimum wage for any worker, local or foreign, companies have no incentive to mechanize when they can employ cheap foreign workers. Thus, our productivity is way below what other high-income countries have achieved in the construction and marine sectors, for example. We achieve profits through risking the lives of workers who come here to earn a decent living, allowing employers to transport them in lorries without seatbelts, and perpetuating the cycle of low-tech, low-productivity construction, which is obviously not sustainable. When salaries and working conditions are decent, Singaporeans will not shy away from hard work. Just recently, a private bus company offered a starting salary of $5,000 a month, and apparently there were 1,292 applicants for 10 places. Most of them were Singaporeans. At the other end of the foreign worker spectrum, we're quite appalled that the PAP sense they have such a little faith in our schools that they feel that after 65 years of running our education system, we can no longer produce men and women of the caliber of Goh Keng Swee, JYM Pillay, Elizabeth Sam, etc. And we have to depend on so-called foreign talent to fill top spots in our banks and corporate world. Here again, the SDP has a policy, our education policy, which offers creative solutions to the failures and gaps in our educational system, which have led to this dependence on foreign talent. Now, during the last GE, some of you will remember, our slogan was 4 yes and 1 no. During the campaign itself, we finally got the PAP to deny that they had a target of 10 million people. After this number had been bandied about at various fora, most prominently by former HDB Chief Architect Mr. Liu Tai Ke. It had never been formally denied until we and others, including I think Meng Seng who's here, brought it up during GE 2020. Despite this disclaimer, the population in Singapore has relentlessly risen, not by an increase in births, but by the massive importation of new citizens and permanent residents. This has put a tremendous strain on our infrastructure, as anyone who has ever taken the MRT during rush hour can tell you. One of our national centers of excellence in healthcare has replied to a forum letter in April 22nd this year by pointing out that for non-urgent or non-site-threatening referrals from primary healthcare providers, a 9-month wait for a specialist review is sometimes the case. As far as I can recall, this was not the case of many years ago when our population was much more manageable. And unfortunately, it's going to get worse. The same is true in housing, transport, and all the other elements which contribute to our quality of life. Now, in this modern world where robots and artificial intelligence will be doing most of our work, or so we are told, it's hard to understand the need for so many people on our tiny island. In addition, Singapore has been described as one of the world's fastest aging societies. Now, this is unfortunately due to misguided PAP population policies. We have among the fastest growing populations in ASEAN, but it's not from more births and fewer deaths, but rather from more imports of 20, 40, and 60-year-olds. While, as I mentioned earlier, we value individuals who can contribute to Singapore or have close family ties, an unchecked influx of people who are going to require medical care a few years after arrival will put a significant strain on our resources and could unfairly disadvantage our own teenagers by placing an additional burden on them. Now, the SDP has a suite of policies which address these issues, not just population, but also housing, healthcare, education, the Malay community, etc. Ironically, many of these have been adapted and adopted by the PAP, but in a watered-down form. A clear example of this is the SDP's healthcare plan, which called for universal healthcare for everyone in Singapore. At that time, MediShield had significant limitations and did not cover diabetes or other pre-existing medical conditions. After we published our healthcare policy, and to be fair, many others took up this issue, the government introduced MediShield Life, which is an improvement on MediShield. However, because of its high deductibles and annual limits, it still does not cover the vast majority of subsidized hospital bills, nor does it cover the cost of very expensive drugs for rare diseases. As we are not in Parliament, we're not able to keep pressing the PAP to explain why they only took the form of a universal healthcare plan without the substance. Another example that's coming up is what we proposed during GE 2020, retrenchment insurance paid through the CPF. It looks like my friend and classmate Tan Si Leng is still working on this, but they are caught in their dependence on the Skills Future program, which apparently only a minority of Singaporeans have benefited from. I would appeal to Si Leng to take a good look at our 2020 manifesto and see what he can learn, and to the voters to make sure that you get us, a few of us, into the next parliament so that a retrenchment insurance scheme that really benefits Singaporeans can be implemented, rather than some watered-down version that sounds good but is not going to be able to deliver the goods for Singapore families. Lastly, I want to speak to our change makers and members here. We really appreciate your hard work over the years, organizing events, visiting the blogs, posting on social media, etc. We appeal to you to bring your friends along as we get closer to the GE. Don't be afraid of POFMA. We were the first victims of POFMA, which celebrated its 5th anniversary earlier this week. We took the case all the way to the Court of Appeal, and it became clearly apparent that it's a very bad law. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is that you do not have to actually say anything which is untrue. But if someone interprets what you say to be something which is not true, then you cannot defend yourself. You have to put up a notice saying that you said something false, even though it may be true in the context you intended it to be. Now, if that's confusing, believe me, it is. That's apparently what the multiple meanings rule means about interpretation. So let me just quote to you from the public version of the Court of Appeal judgment on our case. It said, on the balance of probabilities, an appreciable segment or a particular class of the SDP article's potential audience would have interpreted the relevant sentence in the SDP article as referring to a rising number as opposed to a rising proportion of Singapore PMETs getting retrenched. So, they depend on what they think the public is going to interpret from your statement, regardless of what you think you wanted to say. The other problem with POFMA seems to be its entirely arbitrary nature. Now, Wake Up Singapore was misled by an individual who doctored evidence and told them a tall story. Once they found out, they withdrew the report and issued an apology. They were still served with a POFMA and now face criminal defamation charges. In contrast, the newspaper of record made a false statement about Workers' Party, which they withdrew, but as far as I know, they were not subject to a POFMA or a criminal defamation charge. Not that I would wish that on them, but I think that the message is that POFMA really doesn't have very much credibility as a measure of truth or accuracy. In fact, some people would view it as a badge of honor to be viewed as a credible threat by the ruling party, and thus worthy of a POFMA. I think I talked too much. Okay? You came here to see what we have to offer and to hear about our plans for the campaign to help bring about a more democratic Singapore. I'm going to hand you over to our Secretary General, Dr. Chee Soon Juan, who will give you a more detailed insight into our campaign and our approach. So in the meantime, thank you once again for coming and wishing us all the best for the next